Claire straightened my tie in the parking lot like she was fixing something on a store mannequin. She did it with 2 quick fingers and a tight smile, then stepped back and looked me over from my shoes to my collar. "Just stay close to Michael at first," she said. "These people move fast." It was the word "these" that sat wrong with me. We were standing under the yellow wash of the valet lights outside the Meridian Club in Carmel, Indiana, where the cold had a polished feel to it and even the air smelled expensive, like somebody had heated stone and money together. My son Michael had invited me 2 weeks earlier. Said it was a family dinner tied to a development deal. Said Claire wanted me there because it means something when family shows up. I should have known better than to let that line warm me. My name is Hal Boone. I'm 72 years old, and for most of my life I made my living building the bones of places other people later filled with glass and furniture and opinions. Warehouses, church additions, office shells. 3 strip centers, 1 funeral home renovation, and more dentist suites than I care to remember. I'm not fancy and never was. But I know what a room feels like when you've already been placed in it lower than everybody else. Michael came around the hood of his SUV, checking his phone one last time before pocketing it. "You good, Dad? I'm standing up, ain't I?" He gave me a small smile, the kind he used when he wanted me to stay easy. He looked sharp in a navy suit. Too sharp, if you ask me. He'd never liked ties as a younger man, used to yank them loose the second church was over. Claire had changed a lot of things about the way he looked in public. She took his arm before we went in. That was another small thing, but small things are where most family trouble starts. Inside the lobby smelled like lemon oil and old carpet cleaned too often. There were framed oil paintings of horses on the wall, brass lamps, and 1 woman at the coat check with lipstick so exact it looked painted on with a ruler. Claire gave our names, turned to the woman and said, "This is my husband, Michael Boone. We're with Ellison Development." Then she angled her hand toward me without fully looking at me. "And this is Hal, Michael's dad, not my last name, not father-in-law, not anything that placed me whole in the room. Just Hal, Michael's dad. A loose item brought along because leaving it behind would have seemed rude." The coat check woman smiled the same smile at all 3 of us, but I felt it anyway. Michael must have felt something too because he said, "Dad, you want me to take your coat?" "I can manage my own coat," I said. Claire laughed lightly, too lightly. "Of course he can. There are people who know how to cover a sting with sweetness." Claire had made an art form of it. We went through the main doors into the event room. Round tables, white cloths, a bar set up at the back with 3 men in black vests polishing glasses. Little standing clusters of people talking in low, fast voices about money and parcels and timing. Every man in the room had shoes that looked like they'd never seen a gravel driveway in their life. I suddenly became aware of my own hands. Clean but still broad-knuckled and rough through the skin. Contractors' hands. Widows' hands now too. The kind that still reach for a second coffee cup in the morning before remembering there was no one else in the kitchen. Claire put 1 hand flat against my sleeve. "Maybe don't start with business stories tonight," she said. "Graham likes concise people." Business stories. You know what I mean. Her smile never moved. "Just let Michael and me lead the conversation." Michael said Claire. She turned that same smile on him. "What I'm trying to help. That word, help. Folks use it the way some men use a wrench on things that aren't broken." I nodded once because I did not feel like starting the night by being the old man who bristled in the lobby. I know when to keep quiet. Claire's expression shifted just a touch at that. Relief maybe, or victory. Hard to say the difference sometimes. She led us toward a knot of people near the windows. 1 couple, 2 younger men with shiny haircuts, a woman in a red dress laughing with her chin tipped high. Claire moved into that circle the way certain people step onto boats they're sure won't rock. "Michael," she said brightly, "there you are." She said it like she had discovered him, though he was right beside her. Then she began the introductions, full names, job titles, who had closed what last quarter, who had flown in from Chicago. When she got to me, she put her hand out again without turning all the way. "And this is Hal. He's with us tonight." With us. One of the younger men gave me a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, Hal." I said, "You too." Claire was already back in motion, steering the conversation toward financing windows and mixed-use concepts and the kind of phrases that sound important because nobody would use them standing in a garage. I stayed there half a minute longer than I should have, then drifted toward the bar. Not because I was hurt yet exactly, more because I know what it feels like when a room has decided your place in it. The bartender asked what I wanted. I said club soda with lime because I was driving and because I've never understood why a man needs bourbon just to survive his family. The bartender slid the glass toward me on a black cocktail napkin. Across the room, Claire laughed with one hand on Michael's forearm, like she was holding him in the light. I saw her glance once toward me, make sure I was where she'd left me, then turn back toward the center of things. My wife Donna would have hated that look. Donna had a way of making people take their full shape in a room. Didn't matter if you had money or mud on your boots. She introduced people the way she set a table, everything in its place, nobody half done. 6 years gone, and still I can tell when a woman uses manners to rank instead of welcome. I took a sip of the soda. Too much lime. A server passed with bacon-wrapped dates on a tray. Another came behind him with crab cakes no bigger than silver dollars. The room hummed with the kind of soft money talk that always sounds to me like men trying not to admit they're scared. I've been around enough job trailers and loan meetings to know the difference between confidence and expensive cologne. Michael finally came over. "You okay?" I looked at him. Am I supposed to not be? He slipped one hand into his pocket. "Claire's just trying to keep things tight tonight. Graham's particular." "Does particular mean I need to stand by the fern?" He gave a little exhale, almost a laugh. "Dad, what? Nothing. Just don't take things personally." That one landed. A funny thing happens when your own child says not to take something personally. The exact opposite occurs. Before I could answer, Claire crossed to us in those heels of hers that sounded expensive on the hardwood floor. "There you are," she said to Michael. Then to me, "Hal, I'm going to need Michael for a few minutes. Graham just got here." Need, not ask. She turned Michael by the elbow, but before they left, she looked at my drink and said, "Perfect. Just stay here and relax. We don't want to crowd him at once." I watched them walk away together through the room. Michael didn't look back. I stood near the bar another 10 minutes, maybe 12. Long enough to see Claire lean in close to a silver-haired man I took to be Graham Ellison. Long enough to watch her laugh at something he said. Long enough to understand that I had not been invited here to belong. I had been brought because family photographs better than family truth. Evelyn found me by the wall near the framed black and white photos of old Indianapolis. My daughter hugged me, looked me over once and said, "You all right? I'm vertical." She gave me the look Donna used to give me when I answered pain with smart remarks. "That bad?" I shrugged. "Your brother's busy being important." Evelyn glanced toward the window group where Michael and Claire stood with Graham. Claire's in full Claire mode. That a diagnosis? That's me being polite? I almost smiled. Evelyn had never been impressed by Polish. She worked oncology billing at St. Vincent and had the kind of face that looked softer than it was. She lowered her voice. "You don't have to stay late if she's doing that thing." "What thing?" "Making you seem optional. There's something about hearing your private hurt said plain by the right person. It doesn't make the hurt smaller. It just takes the lie out of it." Before I could answer, Claire passed near enough to hear Evelyn's last word. She didn't stop walking. Just gave us that smooth smile and said, "We're almost ready to sit. Hal, maybe stay toward the outside of the table, okay? It'll make the flow easier." The flow. Evelyn went still beside me. I said, "I've eaten at tables before." Claire's smile held. "Of course you have." She moved on. Evelyn muttered, "Jesus." I said, "Not here." He'd overdress. That got a real smile out of her, small but real. A few minutes later, there was a little shift in the room. More bodies angling one direction, more smiles aimed toward the same man. Graham Ellison had that kind of gravity around him. I've seen it before. A room starts acting like one person holds the weather. Michael caught my eye from across the floor and gave me the kind of nod men use when they want obedience without naming it. Wait there. Not now. Don't complicate this. Then Claire moved closer to Graham, glanced toward me, and said something to the woman in red standing beside them. She said it low. She probably thought low enough, but rooms carry more than people think. The woman in red gave a little surprised laugh. Claire tipped her glass slightly and said clear enough this time for me to hear every word. He's harmless. Just a broke old man. He doesn't know how any of this works. I stood there with the club soda in my hand and felt something inside me go still. Not hot, not wild. Still. That was worse. Evelyn had heard it too. I knew because the muscles in her jaw jumped once. She turned her head toward Claire, then toward me, waiting to see whether I was going to do something with it. I didn't. That's the part younger people never understand about men my age. They think silence means weakness or confusion or not catching on. Most of the time, it means a man is taking the full measure of how ugly something is before he decides whether to touch it. Claire laughed again at something the woman in red said, and Michael stood right there beside her with one hand around his drink. Maybe he hadn't heard every word. Maybe he had heard enough. At my age, you stop giving people the gift of pretending not to know when they should have known. Evelyn said very low, "Dad." I shook my head once. Not because it didn't matter, because I already knew this room would punish the wrong person if I answered too soon. The waiter came through with tiny lamb chops on a tray. Somewhere behind us, somebody dropped a fork and a woman laughed too loudly to smooth over the sound. The room kept going the way rooms do when one person has just had his dignity handled roughly in public. Nobody hears the crack unless they're standing close enough. Evelyn leaned nearer. "We can leave." I looked at my daughter. Her face was tight in that way Donna's used to get when she was trying not to make something worse before she understood it fully. "No," I said. That surprised her. "What for?" I looked back across the room at Michael. He was nodding at something Graham Ellison said, eager in a way I remembered from high school football banquets and first job interviews and all the other moments boys mistake approval for a rival. Claire had one hand at the base of her wine glass and the other resting lightly against Michael's sleeve like she was still arranging him too. For once, I said I'd like to see what happens if I don't leave. That was the truth of it. I had left too many times already in the years before. Not physically always. Sometimes just inward, a joke let go, a shortening introduction ignored. That time Claire told a table full of people at Easter that I still think in pickup truck math, and Michael laughed because it was easier than saying not to. The Christmas when she bought me a silk tie I'd never wear and gave Michael a leather portfolio because it matched where he was headed. The way she used to ask Evelyn about hospital billing like it was real work, but ask me still keeping busy as if a lifetime of building things had somehow dissolved the minute I stopped invoicing. Small things. That's what I'd told myself. Men like me can live half a lifetime on that phrase. Michael finally came over carrying the careful face he used for dealing with weather delays and permit offices. "Dad. Son." He glanced once at Evelyn, then back at me. Claire didn't mean anything by that. There are sentences that arrive wearing their own guilt. That was one of them. I looked at him for a second. "You heard her." He shifted his weight. I heard enough. Enough. My daughter made a sound in the back of her throat, disgusted. Michael lowered his voice. "You know how she gets when she's under pressure." That hit me harder than the insult itself. Not because I'd never heard the excuse before, because he said it like a man handing over exact change, routine, practiced, the fee he paid to keep the evening running smooth. I said, "And how do I get Michael?" He frowned. "What?" "When my daughter-in-law calls me a broke old man in a room full of people she wants something from, how do I get?" His face changed then, just slightly. He was still my boy, under all that good tailoring. Still had the same eyes he had at 12 when he knew he'd done wrong and hadn't yet decided whether to defend it. "Dad," he said, "don't make this bigger." There it was again. Bigger. As though size belonged to the wound rather than the one who made it. I looked down at the club soda in my hand. The ice had melted enough to water it flat. "Go back to your investor," I said. Hal Evelyn began. "No," I handed her the glass. "I'm not leaving. But I'm also not going to chase him around this room for a scrap of respect." Michael held there another second, maybe wanting me to say something that would let him feel more like a son and less like a man who had picked the easier side of the table. When I didn't, he gave one tight nod and went back. I watched him cross the room, watched Claire catch his eye, watched her ask some silent question with her eyebrows. He gave the smallest shake of his head, and she exhaled through her smile and turned back toward Graham, as if that settled it. That did something permanent in me. Not loud, not dramatic, just permanent. Because until that moment, some part of me had still been trying to file this under Claire. Claire's polish, Claire's nerves, Claire's hunger, Claire's meanness dressed up as standards. But a son is not furniture. A son is not wallpaper. If he stands there and lets another person reduce his father for convenience, then that reduction belongs to him too. The room blurred a little after that, not from age, just from how the mind narrows when something old in it is hit square. I remembered Michael at 19 on a muddy job site off County Road 300 home from Purdue for the summer, and mad about everything. Mad about the heat, the mud, the fact that his friends were doing internships with air conditioning while he was hauling cut-offs and sweeping up concrete dust. He'd come to the site in a shirt too nice for work and shoes that wouldn't last the week. I'd told him to go home and change. He'd snapped at me in front of 2 Finnish carpenters. Something about not wanting to spend his life looking like that. Looking like that. I hadn't spoken to him for the rest of the morning. Near lunch, he found me behind the site trailer and said, "I didn't mean you." I told him, "Doesn't matter much who you meant if that's what you think you're looking at." He apologized then. A real one, too. He was young enough that shame still reached him clean. Standing there in the Meridian Club all these years later, I understood that maybe he had meant me after all. Or if he hadn't, then he had learned to. The room shifted again, heads turning. The kind of subtle movement that means the person everyone came to orbit is changing position. Graham Ellison had moved away from the window group and was cutting a slow line through the floor with Claire and Michael beside him. He was a little taller than I'd expected. Silver hair, dark suit, square shoulders, face like a man who had spent years deciding which lies were worth sitting through. He was speaking to Michael at first, but halfway across the room, his eyes passed over Evelyn, the old photos on the wall, and then landed on me. He kept walking 2 more steps, then he stopped. Claire was still talking, something about entitlement windows and mixed-use upside. Graham didn't seem to hear the end of it. He looked at me again harder this time, not rudely, just with the sort of concentrated attention that older men use when memory is reaching for a name through 20 years of weather. I did not move. He let go of whatever Claire had just been saying and said, "Well, I'll be damned." That was not the tone of a man about to brush off a stranger. Claire blinked. Graham. But he was already stepping away from her. He came straight toward me with his hand half out before he'd even fully smiled. Not the smiling kind of smile either. The real thing. Recognition, respect, surprise with weight in it. "Hal Boone," he said like he was saying something solid. "I knew that was you." For a second, the whole room seemed to lose its air. I took his hand. His grip was warm and firm and old-fashioned, and the moment it closed around mine, I knew this was no vague social mistake. This man knew me. "Graham Ellison," I said. He laughed once, short and genuine. "You still got those same shoulders?" "Lord." He shook his head and kept hold of my hand a moment longer than politeness required. "I haven't seen you since the Franklin warehouse job." 98. No, 99. That winter, we had steel delayed for 3 weeks, and everybody thought the whole thing was dead. There are moments when your own life comes back toward you from another man's mouth, and you hear the true weight of it better than you did while living it. 99, I said. Right after Christmas. That's right. He turned slightly enough for the people nearest us to hear without ever raising his voice. This man saved my hide on that project. Claire had gone absolutely still. Michael looked like someone had opened a trap door under his shoes. Graham was still speaking, not performing, just remembering. Bank was breathing down my neck. Concrete schedule was shot, and every consultant in the room had a different answer. Hal walked that half-frozen shell with me one morning and told me exactly what could wait, what couldn't, and where I was about to waste $30,000 trying to look busy. He smiled at me again. Best advice I got on that job, and the cheapest. A few people around us laughed softly, but it was the right kind of laugh now, not at me, at the relief of a room realizing it had mistaken its own order. Graham let my hand go and said, still looking at me, I made my first real money on that building. Then he turned his head just enough to include the others, and what he said next was calm enough to pass for casual unless you knew what it did. If Hal Boone's in your corner, he said, you listen before you pitch. Nobody said anything for about 3 seconds, and in a room like that 3 seconds is a long time. You could hear ice settle in glasses. You could hear a waiter set down a tray too carefully. You could hear the whole shape of the evening tilt. Claire recovered first, or tried to. Well, she said with a quick laugh, that's wonderful. Hal didn't mention any of that. Graham looked at her, then not hard, not rude. Just straight. Didn't he? It was a small question, but it opened her up in the worst possible way. Because there was no good answer. If I had mentioned it and she had ignored it, that said one thing. If I had never mentioned it because I'd learned not to bother, that said another. And neither helped her. I said, didn't seem necessary. That landed too. Graham nodded once, as if that answered something for him. Then he turned back to me. You still doing any work? Not for a living. He smiled. Probably for free, which is worse. That got a real laugh out of the room. Even Evelyn let one out beside me, and that sound did more for me in that moment than I can explain. It sounded like somebody in my family was standing on solid ground again. Michael stepped forward, then trying to climb back into the shape of his own evening. Graham, my dad did a lot of great work back in the day. Back in the day. There it was. The neat little burial phrase. Meant to sound respectful. Mostly used to move a man into the past while he's still in the room. Graham glanced at him but didn't take the cue. That warehouse still stands, he said. And so does the shopping strip off Emerson we built after it. Your father caught a drainage problem on that site before my engineer did. Saved me a lawsuit and probably my company. He looked back at me. I should have tracked you down years ago. I shook my head. No need. There was need, he said. I just didn't do it. Claire's face had gone careful. That was the thing about people like her. When they couldn't control the story, they tried to make themselves look gracious inside it. Well, she said, I guess we all learned something new. Before she could say another word, Evelyn said, flat as a board. Some of us did. Claire looked at her. Michael looked at the floor. Graham, to his credit, didn't pretend not to notice. He had enough age on him to know when a family crack had just gone visible. But he also had enough sense not to poke it for sport. He turned slightly toward the rest of the group and said, if you all don't mind, I'd like a few minutes with Hal. That was all. No big speech, no pronouncement. But it did something stronger than a speech would have done. It rearranged the room around me. A few people stepped back. The woman in the red dress suddenly found great interest in her drink. One of the younger men gave me a nod that carried more respect than his first one had. Claire stood there with a smile that no longer had anywhere to go. Graham and I moved a little toward the side of the room near the old black and white city photographs. Not far, just enough for conversation without making it private. He asked me about the Franklin job, about who I'd been with after Boone Commercial shut down, about whether I still kept up with any of the old crew. Real questions, working questions, not polished room questions asked to prove you had good manners. I answered him plain. Michael hovered twice like he meant to step in, then thought better of it. Claire drifted to the bar, then back to the table layout, then nowhere. She looked like a woman who had spent years learning how to move through important rooms and had never once planned for the room to stop following her lead. After a few minutes, Graham said Michael told me his team had strong financial modeling and sharp presentation. I can see that. But I care just as much about who knows what a bad decision looks like before it gets expensive. He let that sit. Then he asked me, "You seen the sight I had?" Michael had taken me out there once on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks earlier, mostly because he needed a ride back after dropping Claire at the airport. We'd stood in cold mud by a sagging fence line and looked over an old light industrial parcel that somebody wanted to polish into mixed-use miracle. I told him 2 things: the access road would become a bottleneck if they didn't widen the turn lane, and the retention issue on the east edge was going to cost more than the renderings made it look. He'd nodded and changed the subject. I said to Graham, "I seen enough of it." And I looked at him. Then I looked past him at my son and his wife, who were both close enough now to hear if they wanted to. Maybe too close. Good. The east side's going to hold water wrong after a hard rain, I said. And if they don't fix access before they start bragging square footage, half the folks they want won't be able to get in and out clean at rush hour. Graham's face changed in that small way men's faces change when what they suspected gets named by the person they trust. That's exactly what I thought when I drove it last week. Michael's head came up then. "We have engineers reviewing all of that." I turned and looked at him for the first time since Graham had crossed the room. "That, so," I said. He swallowed. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Claire stepped in with a smile she had clearly rebuilt in pieces. "There are always details to tighten. That's why we bring in the best people." I said, "That's interesting." She blinked. "What is the best people part?" My voice was calm enough that it made hers sound sharper than she wanted. "Because 10 minutes ago you were telling folks I didn't know how any of this worked." The room stopped again. Not as hard as the first time. Hard enough. Claire's color changed just a shade. "Well, I think you misunderstood, no." I rubbed the web of my thumb once and let my hand fall. "I heard you just fine." Michael stepped in quick. "Dad maybe not here." That almost made me laugh, but what came up wasn't humor. "Here is exactly where I said." He went quiet. I looked at Claire, then at my son. I had no interest in humiliating them for pleasure. That wasn't what this was. But some things, if you do not name them in the room where they happened, keep living there. "You called me a broke old man," I said. "Maybe I am old. Maybe I never learned how to wear shoes that shine like that." I glanced once at the room, then back at her. But I was standing in rooms like this before you knew the difference between a blueprint and a brochure. The only broke thing I heard tonight was the way my own family introduced me. Nobody moved. Claire opened her mouth, shut it, and looked at Michael. He stared at me like he had not expected me to become fully visible. That more than anything hurt. I said to him quieter now, I could have forgiven her nerves. I could have forgiven her ambition. What I can't make small in my own mind is you standing there and letting me be something you smooth over. His face went slack around the eyes. For 1 second he looked young again. Not in a good way, in the way grown men sometimes do when they realize they have not been caught in a mistake, but in a truth. "Dad," he said, and there was no prepared tone in it now. But he didn't have the rest. Graham did something decent then. He didn't rescue anybody. He didn't pile on. He just said calm as ever, "I think that's enough pretending for one evening." Claire lowered her eyes. Michael looked like he wanted the floor to open. Evelyn came to stand beside me, not touching me, just close enough that I could feel I wasn't the only Boone standing upright in the room. Graham extended his hand again. I meant what I said he told me. If I move forward here, I want your read on that site before I sign anything. I took his hand. I'll give you an honest one. That's the only kind I remember you having. We let go. I nodded once to Evelyn, once to Graham, and then to Michael, because whatever else had happened, he was still my son. Claire. I only looked at. That was enough. She had her answer in the look. Then I picked up my coat from the chair back and walked out. No one stopped me. The night outside had gone colder. My breath showed in front of me as I crossed the lot. Somewhere behind the clubhouse windows there was still laughter. Still silverware, still people trying to finish the evening as if it had remained what they planned, but it hadn't. Rooms change, sometimes all at once. My truck started on the second turn, same as always in winter. I sat there with the engine idling and my hands on the wheel. The lot lights threw a pale shine across the cracked leather at 10 and 2. My tie was still on, though looser now. Donna would have told me to take it off before it wrinkled the collar. I could hear her say it clear as day. Funny thing was, for the first time all evening I didn't feel embarrassed by the truck or the suit or the hands resting on that wheel. I felt tired. Satisfied, too. But tired in the way a man gets after finally lifting something he should not have had to carry that far. I thought about Michael as a boy standing in my garage with a hammer too big for him, waiting for me to show him how to start a nail straight. Thought about Donna at the kitchen counter, introducing me to people with that simple, full certainty of hers. Hal built half this county. Hal knows. Ask Hal. No performance. Just place. Just truth. That I think was the part that stayed with me hardest. Not Graham knowing me. Donna would have expected that from the world. What she would not have expected, what I had let myself not fully see, was how easily your own people can start treating your plainness like absence if you keep absorbing it quietly. I shut off the engine and sat a moment longer in the dark. My right hand still held the memory of Graham Ellison's handshake. Warm, firm, unhurried. Not because it flattered me, because it was the kind of handshake a man gives when he knows exactly who he's touching. After a while, I loosened the tie, folded it neat, and laid it on the seat beside me. Then I put both hands back on the wheel and looked out through the windshield at the clubhouse lights shining against the cold. And I sat there until the warmth of that handshake stopped feeling like surprise and started feeling like mine.